Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of the Extra Shift. I'm Chris. I don't have Brendan, but I figured that I'd, find another co-host for the day, and who better than to travel over to the United States and Leah Merrall from PHNX Sports to talk about the Arizona Coyotes. Leah, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me and crazy time change. So thank you for waking up very early to
Yeah,
accommodate my schedule.
I'd like to reinforce to everybody that I got up at 6 o'clock to do this, so I'm committed. Whereas you had to give up a lunch break, which is also commitment. Um,
Anything to talk hockey, right?
Anything to talk hockey. So, in the spirit of talking hockey, let's start by not actually talking about hockey, unfortunately. But we'll start with the big story, which is the Coyotes Twitter losing their mind. No, we won't start with the Coyotes Twitter losing their mind, although I want to get there eventually because that's fun. The simple question I'm going to start with is, what the hell happened in Tempe? Um,
That's a great question. I think it's one that a lot of us are wondering for a lot of reasons. One of them being the Coyotes were extremely confident in this. Everything was like shaping up to coincide with this being approved, all of their plans, all of it. And literally on the day of, there were people inside who were confident that this was not only a win, but a slam dunk. So for it to go the complete opposite direction, I think was a shock to a lot of people. And we can get into why
Yep.
it went that way, but yeah, it was a complete surprise.
It was fascinating because I was watching your live stream of the vote, and first of all, I felt and one of the things that I sort of want to get into as well is how hard it is to do that coverage when you're sitting there and I could see both of you in the studio were like, "Yep, okay, this is gonna be good. Everyone's really confident. This is good." You start the coverage, and then there's just this moment where I think you look down at the laptop while the conversation is, so we can do this after this, and you look down at the laptop, and I just saw your face drop.
Yeah.
I'm like, the votes have just come in, and then trying to then move the coverage along at the same time when everyone seemed super confident. Like all you heard in the lead in was this really sort of, I don't want to say arrogance, because I mean, in hindsight, when we talk about what happened from the organizational standpoint, maybe, but it just felt like everyone was like, well, it's obvious, because I think the plan felt obvious. I mean,
Yeah.
not to put too fine a point on it, but the site in Tempe is a dump. Literally a dump.
Literally. Yeah.
So
That's not hyperbole. It literally is a dump.
exactly. And I think that for a lot of people sort of watching it, if you just read the proposal site made sense. I think what I saw from an outside perspective, following it not as closely obviously as you or anyone connected with the organizational team, was just the campaign felt like on one side it was, here's the proposal, on the other side it was like the billionaires. And no discussing what the proposal was. Is that sort of accurate?
Yeah, I would say the Tempe wins, which was the yes and Coyotes side. It was, here's the proposal. Here's how it benefits Tempe. Here's all the jobs it will create. Here's the benefit, the economic benefit to the city, the state, all of that. They were pushing that and how it would help. The Tempe First campaign, they're very confusing because they're similar names, but they were the no campaign. They were pushing the agenda of no handouts for billionaires, no handouts for corrupt billionaires. There's a better deal out there. And I think where the disconnect was in between that is that the Tempe Wins campaign never came back to combat what the Tempe First campaign was saying. So I think like maybe the Coyotes thought that the deal would sell itself, but because, unfortunately, like people can tell lies and people will believe it. And we've seen that, unfortunately, a couple of times here in the United States. But, I don't feel that the Coyotes and Tempe Wins did enough to combat the misinformation that was coming from Tempe First. And they really stuck to that story. They hammered it home from day one. And that was the other thing, too. As soon as this was going to a public vote, the no campaign was boots on the ground, like knocking on doors, launching their campaign. And the Coyotes were a little bit slower, to the point we actually had Tempe City Council member Randy Keating on our show in February, early February, saying, like, hey, we kind of need to get this going. And the Coyotes were like, oh, we just want to wait till the Super Bowl, because that was here in Arizona that month as well. And like, let's just wait till everything dies down. But I think that was another misstep. I know you haven't quite asked me about all the missteps yet, but it's just,
Oh, they're all coming. Don't panic.
yeah. But I
they're
think
definitely
that
coming.
played a factor. Yeah.
It just, as I said, it was a really for I think a lot of people in Australia, the hard part was that obviously the fact that everything was sort of proposed and then it went to a public vote, which it didn't need to do, but would probably eventually have, because of the
Yeah.
way that the system works over there, which I believe is that if you get, is it 100,000 signatures or something like that?
I think it's a percentage of
Yeah.
signature, like a percentage of the previous elections,
Yeah. Then
like
you can take
turnout.
it
It's
to
like, yeah. And I don't know that exact number, but I think they felt that they could have easily gotten those signatures, which is
it's,
why they did that.
yeah, it's a really interesting, and again, the hard part I think for a lot of people in Australia to understand is the system, because most of our stadiums here are publicly built, like they're owned by the government and they build them. There are private stadiums, but not as many, obviously, because it's a different population. And the major, all the big major stadiums in Australia were built usually as part of a public works thing, and maybe now they've gone into private hands, or they're just usually really heavily corporately sponsored, but that the state owns them and they control them. So that's I think another interesting one, I think, for a lot of people here. The big couple of the big football sports stadiums here, for example, like the big ones in Sydney, which were the Olympic Stadium, which was built obviously as part of the Olympics.
Yeah.
And then the other big stadium in the middle of Sydney, which was just knocked down and rebuilt, was knocked down and rebuilt by the state government. So like no one bats an eyelid with that. That's normal. Whereas over there, it's a very different system. And I mean, that's something else that people have a difficult time computing when they look at that. They go, okay, so who's building the arena? And I think the other thing, let's get into some of the missteps, because I want to get into why the vote went south before we get into possible future steps. Do you think that some of the problem stemmed from having an owner who had a, let's say, checkered past with the media in particular?
I think it had to play a part. I think it's really hard to feel any sort of sympathy or empathy for a billionaire.
Alex Merrall is not a sympathetic character.
And I don't know if there is a sympathetic billionaire. Like,
I know
that,
and
least,
personally there shouldn't be, but
yeah, not one that I've ever come across. So I totally understand from that point where Tempe voters might have been thinking, like, I don't want to help this guy. I 100% understand where that stemmed from. Alex Merlo famously does not speak to media. He spoke at his introductory press conference, and at one Tempe Wins event I went to last month, he said one sentence to everybody in attendance, and that was really it. It's mostly President and CEO Javier Gutierrez, who is kind of the mouthpiece of the organization.
And I've seen, to give you an idea, just from an outside perspective, I've seen so many articles when I've gone over all this stuff where they've talked about Coyotes owner Javier Gutierrez, and I'm like, no, it's Alex Merlo.
Yeah, but it just, Alex Merlo is very quiet. He doesn't put himself in the forefront, and I think that's different than how other owners are. And I think the other thing, and one of the missteps too, is they were promoting what this entertainment district, not just the arena, but the entertainment district that would come with it, retail, apartments, all of that. They were touting it as like, oh, the Rodeo Drive of Tempe. And I think in retrospect, maybe that doesn't resonate so much with Tempe residents. Like when you think of the greater Phoenix area, you think of, if you're going to think of a Rodeo Drive anywhere, it's going to be Scottsdale, which is, kind of the fancier area here in Phoenix for those not familiar. But to, Tempe, it's more of a, I don't know, like a down to earth city in that sense. So I don't know if that was the right messaging. So you have that messaging combined with a billionaire owner, combined with someone who isn't even the one who's going front facing out to the community, to the media, etc. I can see how for the voters it would be hard to want to vote yes in his favor.
The other thing that confused me in terms of as a campaign was putting situations forward where the unions very quickly got themselves offside. That feels dangerous to me in an election campaign where you're looking at funding, that to put the unions offside and to not at least have a conversation in more depth about how the union would be involved in the building and the construction feels really dangerous when you're trying to rally public votes, because union organization is good, it's fast, it's quick, effective, and they pay. And I mean, what sort of came out of sort of the figures that we got, the initial figures that we got, was that I think it was almost $2 million, and the rallying of the unions had a large effect in getting people out to vote no. Do you feel like the organization maybe underestimated the unions in Tempe?
I think the interesting thing about the union part of it was there was a union that was very much on the vote no side because they wanted their union to be the one to be involved in the construction. And the problem with that was Alex Morello had said that he wanted to use union work to do the construction, but Alex Morello has construction companies that have unions, so
unions.
he wanted like he would have used unions, it just wouldn't have been the union that was on the no side. But I don't think that was something that was made clear in the campaigning. And when again, as we look back at all the missteps of the Yes campaign, I think just they didn't do a good enough job combating what the No campaign was saying, because in black and white and on the internet where there's really no room for nuance, if you see, oh, like, we're a union, we want to do this, and they are saying no, you can, if you're pro-union, you're thinking, well, like, I'm on their side. But that wasn't the case. But it wasn't very clear to the voters that there was still going to be union labor on this project. It just wasn't going to be that particular union. And I just don't think that was made clear enough either.
Yeah, I think the messaging seems to be the big letdown in the whole campaign. And they were outspent significantly, which again I think reflects that it's a campaign that thought they had it won and they didn't really need to push any harder. But the messaging, again, and one of the things I found, as I mentioned to you before we started, was when we were first talking about this in the Australian NHL fans page, and we put that up, it was literally just the billionaires were going to benefit from it. No people were going to benefit from it. What about the affordable housing? What about it? What about? The affordable housing bit was also really interesting, because is there actually a plan in place to build affordable housing that doesn't involve, $40 million of public money to clean up the industrial waste?
Well, and also, like, what a lot of people outside of this area, I think, when they hear that, they think, well, why wouldn't they use the land for that? This land is prime real estate. Like, it is that's why the Coyotes wanted to build there. Yeah. It's right at the intersection of major freeways. It's kind of in the heart of the valley here. This is an amazing location. So to build, like, listen, I think like me and us at PHNX, and I'm sure the Coyotes, like, they want to see affordable housing, but you're not going to get affordable housing on that land. It is far, far, far too expensive to have it there, like, just to build, to have, like, it truly does not make sense for that land. And I think people, again, it's like these buzzwords, oh, they could build affordable housing there, they could build parks there instead of a arena, but it's like, this land is so valuable, and whatever does get built there, if anything ever, like, it's not going to be a park and it's not going to be affordable housing, unfortunately. And I know that sounds harsh, but that's just not the reality of this land.
To equate it for people in Australia, there was a situation where there was a public housing building in Sydney overlooking Sydney Harbour. It was literally a old tower that was built in the 1920s. So, and it was all public housing. So, it was affordable public housing for people who, they go through the government, they get put into place in public housing. It was next to brand new buildings, all of which were worth, hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's prime real estate on the waterfront, overlooking the Harbour Bridge, overlooking the Opera House. And when the government went, we're going to move people to new affordable housing because this land is too valuable and we can put money into the coffers to pay for more affordable. There were people who went, oh, no, you shouldn't move that land on. And it's like, no, we're going to build more affordable housing, lots more of it.
Yeah.
With the money we're about to get from selling this building in a very prime location, because the affordable housing can go over here where it's cheaper and we can build more of it and it can be bigger. And that building can go down and someone can pay us enough money to build a $200-300 million skyscraper overlooking the harbour. That's sort of obviously not Tempe Harbor, because no, but
No,
the point is, again,
but
that prime,
it's yeah, it's a good comparison in terms of the prime real
yeah,
estate and the fact that there, like, frankly, there was never going to be affordable housing on that land. There just wasn't.
no, it was a really good buzzword that worked really well in a campaign.
Yeah.
And again, the thing that keeps coming back, and you've mentioned it a few times, is it just seems that the idea of messaging what the Coyotes wanted, not just for themselves, but for the broader landscape of Tempe. And look, there will be people listening to me talk about this going, you're ignoring, no. Alex Morello stood to make a lot of money off this. I'm not going to sit there and lie. The gaming license side of things, all of those things, he's going to make a lot of money. And there were tax breaks that were being thrown in there. So yes, he was going to make a lot of money off this. My thing off the back of that is that you're not going to build a public arena or an arena anymore, really, in the United States or Canada at this point in time. We may reset using purely private funding because the genie's already out of the bottle when it comes to American sports and Canadian sports. Insofar as that the genie's out of the bottle, that all of these billionaires also know that if they really want to get an arena built, and we've seen franchises, again, we've seen franchises move. And because the billionaire goes, well, I want a new arena here, and if you won't give me what I want, somebody else will. And the answer is normally somebody else will give them the breaks that they want. So it's one of those things where you're always going to have to get some form of public money. We're not back in the situation where the Bell Centre was being built in Montreal, where the Molson family could just reach into their pockets and go, here, have an arena. Not something that's going to happen at the moment. Again, personally, do I think it should happen? Yeah. But if it's open to you and you're a billionaire, why would you? That's sort of the question for me, is why would you? And the threat of moving, and we'll talk a bit about that before we talk about the options back in Arizona, the threat of moving, which always feels more external than from the NHL, because we know that Gary Bettman is very much, and the Board of Governors have very much been locked in behind, no, we're keeping the Coyotes in Arizona. We're keeping the Coyotes in Arizona. And all those, every time the moves have happened, the Glendale and all that, we're keeping the Coyotes in Arizona. The outside noise of trying to move the franchise consistently, how from an internal perspective, how does the market and how do you guys deal with the perpetual outside noise of, I just move them?
The block button and the mute button is has been our friend both on YouTube and Twitter.
Yep.
I mean, I just think that's been the reality of being a Coyotes fan forever. This has been kind of the dark cloud over this organization from the time that they were bankrupt and the NHL had to buy them, to multiple attempts to move the team, to most recently last summer, moving out of Glendale, moving into Mullett, and now today. It just feels like a never-ending saga. So I don't think there is a world in which you're an Arizona Coyotes fan and there aren't people saying move the team to Houston, move the team to Quebec City. Like, that's just the reality of being a Coyotes fan, unfortunately. And lately, this last week, obviously we're seeing that to the max. I mean, that stream you talked about that we did, the live stream during the vote, like, I would say more than half of our live chat was people saying move the team to Houston, move them to Quebec, move them here, move them there. It's just, it is what it is, but I gotta say, it's really, really hard to hear. It's really hard to hear.
I was going to say, because I was watching that live stream when the votes were coming in, and I mean, you both referenced it a couple of times, but sort of did a very good job to not just lash out at everybody in the chat, which I would have done. I pride myself on being able to sort of hold my tongue a little bit, but I would have been sitting there just like really, this is my darkest moment, and really, you Houston, you want Quebec, really, and I would have gone on a tear. So the fact that you didn't is impressive. I think for me, the other thing, the way I've always viewed the move talk is I think there's a lot of salty hockey fans who never got over the Jets being moved in the first place. So this is their aha. You see, and even though the Jets are back and like they exist again and they're a thing again, I think there are some people who are still just like twist the knife. We're gonna do it to you too. And I think one of the things that I've learned a bit more of, and I sort of had a bit of an idea of it, but I've learned a bit more of, is the benefit of the Coyotes being there in terms of junior development and youth development.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to just like how the development system in Arizona in particular has sort of taken off because of the Coyotes?
Yeah, it's interesting because we've been talking a lot, like if the Coyotes were never here, what the hockey landscape would look like here, and it would be so different. I
Well,
mean,
Toronto would have a significantly smaller cap hit for a start.
exactly, right? Yeah, there would be no Austin Matthews, there would be no Matthew Nyes. Like there's a few things, but I mean, when there's an NHL team in a city, they invest money in youth hockey and development. There's more arenas around the valley now because of the Coyotes, the Ice and Scottsdale being one. The youth programs, we actually last summer had Josh Doan's son of Coyotes captain Shane Doan, and then Matthew Nyes, who's now on the Toronto Maple Leafs, both Arizona-born guys on our show. And they talked about when they were young growing up playing hockey, you know, they were trying to pull together anyone just to fill a team. And now there's like wait lists of hundreds and hundreds of people, like just to get into playing hockey. And I think there's a statistic somewhere that like the ratio of hockey players to ice is like in Arizona, it's like the biggest in the US. Like there's not enough ice is kind of the bottom line of that. And if you completely took the Coyotes away, let's just say they were never here, like you would not have any of that. And it goes a lot to the development. And I want to, acknowledge Matt Schott, who unfortunately passed away last year or the year before, but he played a huge role in youth development and development of girls hockey as well. The Kachina program, thanks to him and Lindsay Fry, has grown substantially since its establishment, and it's now become a competitive hockey program too. And none of that happens if the Coyotes aren't here.
I find it really interesting. You get people saying, "Oh, hockey doesn't work in the desert, or hockey doesn't work in that marketplace." When, I mean, obviously, people ignore that with Vegas because glitz and glamour and lights and blah 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 blah. People are ignoring that. Look, to be blunt, I'm a Sharks fan, and we all know that San Jose, California, and Silicon Valley is the perfect place for ice hockey. It's exactly where ice hockey should always have been. And again, you look at the Anaheim is a normal place for. There's no complaining there. The complaints don't happen there. It just seems to be a really interesting. Well, we're just going to focus on Arizona because, well, why Arizona? It's like that outside of the Strip, Vegas is like desolate in large areas, right? There's rinks on every corner. There's definitely not rinks on every corner in Las Vegas. I'm just putting that out there. So speaking of the ice, I have to talk about the Mullett Arena. So how has, look, for want of a better term, how has the Mullett experience been?
It's been amazing. I mean, as a fan, let's just say, I think it is so cool and so unique. You are literally like the furthest back you would sit is 13 rows. I think there's people who've been to hockey games who've never sat closer than 13 rows, and now you go to Mullett and that's like you're right on top of the action. The small space makes for an amazing atmosphere. There's been games out in Glendale where they only sold half the rink. You can hear a pin drop. The atmosphere sucks. Every game I went to at Mullett this year, the atmosphere was amazing. The noise was incredible. And we saw it translate to the team's performance because they outperformed at home. They had an unbelievable home record. And I think that, went back to what that experience was like. And like the fans turned out, and we heard that the ice was phenomenal, like brand new, amazing ice. So from the fan perspective, I think the Mullett experience is amazing. The players, I guess that's a different story. We'd have to ask them, frankly. I don't know. I can't speak for them. But as a fan, it's next to nothing you find anywhere else.
It just looked like a lot of fun. But again, I think, and obviously not sustainable long term. No one, before anyone jumps at me and goes, "You can't stay at Mullett." No one thinks you can stay at Mullett.
No.
But it's fun, and there's going to be another season of fun, so that'll be interesting. Just before we sort of head towards the end here, my other question is, rather than go through the options in great detail because we don't have enough time to go through all the options, although I may get you on a bit later to talk about them. Do you have any of the proposed options that you think is the one they should go for?
I think, and Craig Morgan, who's my co-host on the PHNX Coyotes show, he's written about this on our website, so you can check that out. Go phnx.com. So he's more of the expert on this topic, but we did go over them this week, and the ones that I like, and again, there's pros and cons to each. There's hurdles on each, so like this, nothing's easily a watch. But there's this thing in Arizona called County Islands. What is it? I don't fully know, and I didn't know that word before this week.
I listened to this week, and I was confused but interested.
Yeah. Basically, there's like land that's owned not by the cities, but by the counties, but they're all kind of over the valley, and there's a few locations that are still really, really prime. Like there's even one that's pretty close to where the proposed Tempe site would have been. So, I mean, that's an interesting possibility. Again, there are so many nuances to this that I don't understand. So that's just me saying what my ideal thing would be. The other would just be if they can, make a private sale work on private land somewhere. That would be another option, because the bottom line is they cannot be in another situation with a public vote. Not only do they not have the time, but you just can't risk what just happened again.
And you get the feeling there are people that would follow them around to try to make the vote go poorly. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, they learn. I think they learned their lesson. They cannot do that again. So they just need to do something that can stick them on the same timeline. They can still be on the timeline they're on right now, because the land in Tempe, they would have had to spend a year just remediating the land before they even put a shovel in the ground. If they can find a site, hopefully by the end of this summer, and put the shovels in the ground like before the year ends, they might not skip a beat and continue to play the plan out at Mullett, which was, for a couple more seasons, and move in to a brand new arena still on the exact same timeline as the Tempe situation. That honestly, like, that's the best case scenario, and that's what we're all hoping for here.
Yeah, I recommend to people check out. I'll put links in under us to the video from yesterday, which I thought was fascinating. The land video. I thought that was a really interesting sort of take on it, and especially like the blue areas. I'm like, that's in the middle of the downtown area.
Those were opportunity zones. I don't really even know what that is either. There's just like so much that is so beyond our scope of like being people who thought we were just going to talk about hockey for.
I rewound twice. Hang on, what's that? But to briefly talk about hockey before we finish up, the other reason I'm talking to you is the Coyotes are coming to Australia. So what really, first of all, what should the fans expect? And secondly, what do you think the team expects out of coming to Australia?
Yeah, it's so funny. Like when the season ended, this was the big story. Like, we're going to Australia. And then obviously that has been so far like removed from everything we've been talking about. So it's funny. Hopefully, like my hope is that by the time the team plane is on the way to Australia, we know what the arena situation is. I think for fans in Australia, you can expect the Coyotes to send their stars. I don't think they would do that if they didn't. Clayton Keller, I know he's even been on billboards like advertising it there. I've seen. And I think that's what's really cool for the fans in Australia. If you're, and again, hopefully the arena thing works out, because I really want people to understand, like, the Coyotes are in a really cool position right now. Like, they're at the beginning of, hitting the point where they're going to start to get good over the next few years here and really pick up steam. So if you're an Australian hockey fan, but you don't really have an allegiance to any team, like, now is a good time to get in on the Coyotes while they're kind of at the bottom. You'll never be called a bandwagon fan if you start now. But yeah, I think it's going to be a really cool experience. And as for the team, we asked them a ton about it when the news came out, and they're all really excited. The majority of them had never been to Australia. The majority of them didn't know much about Australia at all. We asked them kind of whatever they knew, or to name cities other than Sydney and Melbourne, and some lingo as well. And they very much failed the test. So I think it'll be really exciting for them to get to experience that new culture. I think a lot of them are really, really looking forward to getting to go somewhere they've never been. So for the team themselves, I think they're excited, and I hope the fans embrace the Coyotes, because all the drama off the ice aside, like, this could be potentially like a really exciting team to cheer for in the coming years.
And also, not being a biased Sharks fan or anything, but the Kings of the Evil Empire don't support the Kings.
Oh yeah, and we in Arizona hate all LA teams, and the Kings are no exception, especially because the Kings beat the Coyotes in the Western Conference Final in 2012, and none of us
We've all
have
been there.
forgotten it.
We've all been there. Some of us have trauma that still to this day will never leave.
I like that we can all agree we don't like LA, or at least
no,
you and
exactly.
I, Chris.
We can all agree on that. We can all agree on that one. And I mean, look, in an absolute worst case scenario, Alex Merrill, I guess, to have a look at the idea of the Melbourne Coyotes. I mean, it's fast travel.
If I have to move to Australia to cover the Coyotes, I guess twist my arm.
You just have to be forced into do that. Leah, thank you very much for joining us. It's been an absolute delight. I hope to get to talk to you again later on about the team a bit.
Yeah, I'd love to.
But thank you very much. Let everyone know where they can find you and where they can find all of your really good content.
Thank you. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Leah Merrall is my Twitter. But most importantly, we have our show Monday through Friday, US time zone, I guess, 11 a.m. Pacific time in the US on the PHNX Sports YouTube channel. And then our Twitter account is at PHNX_Coyotes. So we have all of our stuff on there as well.
Australian fans are very good at converting because we're used to it by now because we have it. So thank you very much, Leah, for your time. Very much appreciated. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll catch you all later.